when I sit down, right, as a human and I write down my 10 happiest moments, like 8 of them have to do with skiing with my family. And those aren't high speed lifts or gondolas or fancy bottles of wine. I think, again, there's lots of ways to make money and spend your time on the planet. But this is how I want to spend mine.
Welcome to the storm. I'm your host, Stuart Winchester. I've been telling you about the Indy Pass for years, and have always maintained that it had the potential to be a force for change in the ski industry. But once Entebeni Systems purchased the pass in 2023, Indy exploded both in scale and influence, and has since added more than 100 new partners and has stepped up to save one of the oldest continuously operating ski areas in America. It is an awesome story that just keeps getting better, and we are going to dig deep into it today with the guy who's making it all happen. First though, let me remind you that you can now watch the Storm Skiing podcast either on stormskiing.com or YouTube. To do that, please hop over to the Storm's new YouTube channel at Storm Ski Journal and give that channel a follow. Future podcasts will post there, and we will have some additional content dropping there later this year as well. You can also follow the Storm on X or Instagram at Storm Ski Journal. And you can now rep the Storm, like I'm doing here with this hoodie, by swinging into the Storm store at stormskiing.myshopify.com, where you can pick up a hat, hoodie, shirt, sticker, and a bunch of other stuff. But as always, the very best way to support the Storm's mission of independent ski journalism is by upgrading to the paid tier of the Storm Skiing Journal and Podcast, which will get you access to 100% of the Storm's written content, past, present, and future. And here's a bonus. For a limited time, when you upgrade to the paid version of the Storm Skiing Journal and Podcast, you will also get a free year of Slopes Premium. That is a $29.99 value, absolutely free. If you are not familiar with Slopes, it is the most incredible ski tracking app. It compiles your stats by day, by trip, by season, by lifetime. Also very cool, the real-time tracking of your friends while you're at the hill. And at many resorts, one-touch contact with Ski Patrol. If you want to try Slopes, you can claim a free premium day pass by clicking on the link in the article that accompanies this podcast on stormskiing.com. All right, time for episode 199 of the Storm Skiing Podcast. Erik Mogensen, founder of Entebeni Systems, director of the Indy Pass, and temporary owner of Black Mountain, New Hampshire. My guest today is the founder of Entebeni Systems, a company that provides software and hardware engineering exclusively for independent ski areas. He is also director of the Indy Pass, which will provide pass holders with 2 days each at more than 250 ski areas in North America, Japan, Europe, and perhaps beyond for the 2025 to 26 ski season. He is also the temporary steward of Black Mountain, New Hampshire, as he prepares to transform that ski area into just the second successful ski co-op in the United States. Black Mountain, which features 1,100 vertical feet served by 2 chairlifts, has been in continuous operation since 1935. He is also a very good friend of the Storm. Erik Mogensen is my guest. Erik, welcome at last to the Storm. I cannot thank you enough for making this your first ever ski podcast. How you doing in New Hampshire tonight, man?
I'm good. It's nice to be in New Hampshire. It's really dark, a little bit cold, could be colder. And yeah, how long have you been doing this, Stu?
5 years.
5 years. Look at that. So
yeah.
It took 5 years. But yeah, happy to be here. Really excited and appreciative of the work that you do.
So I was up in New Hampshire last week, and I was up there Saturday, Sunday, Monday at Black Mountain skiing around, and the snowbanks were as high as I've ever seen them in New Hampshire. Then I flew to British Columbia, and my thought when I was driving up to Panorama was, my God, they have more snow in New Hampshire and New England right now than they do in BC. How is the year going overall for you at Black Mountain?
Well, I guess snowfall is relative, right? I grew up in Buffalo, and then, spent a lot of time in Colorado. So for me, there was a period of time here in December where I was wondering if it was going to ever actually snow. And then it did come at once. So it's nice to hear. But I've never really skied in New Hampshire prior to doing this. So I don't really know what a lot of snow is like, but it's going well. It's going really well. I think um, it's, I think we had an idea of how I thought the project might be received, and it's exceeded my expectations.
So you'd never skied in New Hampshire before. You grew up in the East, but you'd moved west and moved west a while ago. Why did you care if Black Mountain, New Hampshire went out of business?
Um, I didn't really. I think I had never been here. I had never actually looked at the trail map. And I saw what 2 years ago in October that it was going to close, and I saw it on Facebook, and I was really confused, and I definitely saw the outrage of a lot of people, and I guess I didn't realize how special Black was until I saw a lot of the outrage that it was going to close.
So now that you're there, why is it special?
It's special, I think, for a couple of reasons. One, there's a lot of history here. There's not a lot of ski areas that can say that they've been around for 90 years. It still has a pretty remarkably historic overhead cable lift over on Whitney Hill. And it has terrain. It's in a ski community that's incredible. You look at the Mount Washington Valley, you look at Jackson, you look at the ski history that exists here. There's just a lot of things that Black Mountain has that other ski areas don't have. The Summit Double Chair is just not something that you see very often. And so it's grown on me as to why it's special. It's really warmed on me.
You have said to me several times, and I've heard you say several times, you have no interest in owning a ski area, but you own a ski area. And this was after an intervention in 2023 where you helped stabilize the operation after Black said they were going to close and helped to keep them open. And you were going to help them find a buyer. You ended up becoming the buyer. Why?
So we got involved. We got Andy Shepard involved, who's been amazing, and stepped in, said, okay, John, how do we keep this place going? Let's get through another year. The most important is that, we find a new ownership group or person. So you got to stay open. Let's keep you open. Let's get through it. And we're going to work really hard to put a package together and try to sell it. Met with like 30 to 40 different groups. Nobody wanted to buy it. Nobody could buy it. It just wasn't going to transact. And, really started to give up on it, honestly. I think, that was really tough. And it's demoralizing too, because you go in and you think you can solve the problem. We're going to keep it open. We're going to look like the heroes, and I'm going to help you sell it. And now we can't sell it. And so we really did give up on it for a month there and thought that was just going to be that. And we're going to stay focused on the technology company in Colorado and going through it. And, a couple interesting things happened. I talked to the whole team about it, and the team was pretty much like a hard no at Entebbe. We don't want to do this.
They didn't want to move to New Hampshire, or they just thought it was a boondoggle?
Yeah, they didn't want to move to New Hampshire in general, and then they thought it was a boondoggle. And then basically every GM that I talked to in the East was like, because I had tried to sell it to so many of the other Indy Pass ski areas and operators, and they're like, yeah, dude, you don't want to do this. And so I was like, no, I'm not going to do this. And then midsummer, I was in a partnership with a girl for about 10 years, and that ended quite abruptly. And I think, we were going to build a house and have a family and do those things. And if that hadn't happened, I definitely wouldn't have moved to New Hampshire. There is no way that person and I were moving to New Hampshire. So that made it somewhat interesting for me to make the move across the country and to leave Colorado and to buy a house in this little town in Jackson, New Hampshire. And then shortly after that, a couple of weeks after that, I found out that my dad had cancer. And when you go through the realization of what it might be like to not have someone on the planet that you're really close to and that you really love and that was a big part of your life, you start to think about your happiest moments together. And our happiest moments all came down to skiing. They all came down to skiing. And that started to prioritize things in my life a little bit more. And it was that night where I said, hey, you know what? We're going to do this. We're going to make it happen. And even then, I had these thoughts of like, hiring a GM and somebody other than myself to go do that. And I had really thought about putting Mark Schrotel, our COO, and asking him to move here. He's run Bear Creek for a long time, CEO of Powder Mountain for a long time, did a really good job. And I thought that'd be good. Nobody wanted to do that. So nobody wanted to be the GM of Black. And I thought, okay, we get one shot at this, and I'm got to be responsible for the outcome. And I've never been a GM before, and have learned a lot. And we've asked a good portion of the Entebbe team to move out here. And it's been an interesting sacrifice for sure. But yet, look how successful it is right now.
So I was up there, as I mentioned, and the place was buzzing. And you gave me a lot of numbers, and I don't want to share those on your behalf because I'm not sure what was public and what was not. But I think I can say the Black Mountain's having its best winter ever. What can you tell us about the business so far this year and why it's doing so well?
Well, I think what we can definitely say is that, when we look back at when we stepped in and announced this, one of the things that we thought had to happen is that we had to triple the revenue here to make it sustainable. And we're well on our way to doing that. We've surpassed doubling the revenue at this point with a lot of weeks and days left in the season still. And I do think that we'll actually exceed tripling the gross revenue.
That's unheard of in skiing. No one does that. How did you do it?
Well, I think part of it is where you start from, and we got to be honest there too, right? So Black's revenue was low for sure, and it's so easy to turn to revenue, right, as a success indicator, where that's how successful our ski area is because we've tripled revenue, or this is what our revenue is, or this is what our yield is. But for me, I think it ultimately, if you want to triple revenue, you have to have more people come here, right? And we had to find a way to get more people come here. Tripling revenue is a result, and the cause is that more people come here. And you also can charge less people more money and triple revenue, but we didn't want to go down that road. We wanted to just get more humans here. And if you want more humans to come here, you can't trick them to come here, not for very long. You have to get them here initially, and then you have to want them to come back, right? And again, you can't trick them to come back. You have to get them to come back on their own accord, and you have to have them bring other people with you. And so what we were super concerned about, and to directly answer your question, how do you triple revenue? How do you double revenue? How do you do more than that? Is you have to make it a place that people really want to come to, and that they want to come back to, and that they want to tell their friends about. And I think a lot of that just comes down to culture.
So how did you approach that? I mean, how did you reset the culture at Black Mountain?
Well, there's a couple things, right? So one of the things when we went into the lodge, just as a kind of micro example, went in the lodge, and there's all these signs of like no brown bag. You have to buy your food here. You have to do this. You can't store this stuff here. And we just took all those down. And super easy to focus on the revenue and go, well, we got to turn tables. We got to run, people through F&B. You can't bring your own food in. You can't do those things. And what I realized is that actually, and I knew this because this is what my family did, we really like coming and plugging in our crock pot and bringing our picnic basket and getting your own little table and packing all your stuff in. And we have people bring in their high chairs and their strollers and picnic baskets, and they set up for the day. And what we found is that didn't decrease F&B revenue. That actually was a huge piece of us increasing the overall revenue of the ski area. And that's because people wanted to come here, and they wanted to come back, and they told their friends. And the base lodge became a place not just to transact in terms of food and beverage, but a place to gather. It's a clubhouse. We actually have kids that build forts around tables and do all these amazing things. But that culture, that move of allowing people to brown bag where and when they want, was what created the culture, and is what made people come to Black and go, wow, this is really different. And it's what I'm nostalgic about. It's what I remember about skiing. I think the other thing that we looked at too is, running the double all the time. So last year at Black, The double ran 3 days, and we ran a triple to the 3/4 point of the hill. And we said, at all costs, we need to run the double all the time. How would you like to show up at a mountain and be told you can't go to the top? It's not a lot of fun. Every kid wants to go to the top. And then I had never been here. I'd never been up to the summit until we actually closed the transaction. And I get up to the summit and I go over the top and I'm like, this is the coolest I've ever been. And then there's Mount Washington right as you crest over. And it's the most amazing thing. So just taking advantage of what makes us different. And what makes us different is that we do have this really cool lift. We can run it to the summit. We have remarkable views. I don't view south facing as a liability. I view it as an opportunity to ski in the sun. I don't view our brown bag policy as a liability. I view it as an opportunity to provide a different and better product over other things. So I think those decisions started to sort of formulate what the culture could be.
You know, there aren't many guarantees in skiing, but one thing I can guarantee, if you go wandering the world with your Indy Pass, at some point, it is going to get cold. And if you're anything like me, the first thing to freeze up will be your feet. Unless you do what I did and start rocking Hotronix ski boot, foot warmers, and heated socks. Now, when I'm booting up for the day, I plug in my batteries, I head out into the elements, and I forget all about my formerly problematic feet. I've been on the heated boot warmers for years, but lately I've become heated sock bro. And a big reason for that is that, unlike with ski boots, I can pull out the heated socks for any part of my active lifestyle. Tailgating, cold weather bike rides, even if I'm just running errands around the neighborhood when it's below freezing. And Hotronix technology just keeps getting better. The latest generation of Hotronix gear has a larger footprint, but smaller, more anatomical batteries that last up to 18 hours. And they are all Bluetooth enabled and manageable from an app on your smartphone. Stop enduring the elements. Fight back instead with Hotronix ski boot, foot warmers, and heated socks. You can click the link in the banner on the podcast article to get started. Back to Erik. So the culture piece, it's important to really understand that, to not just understand what Black Mountain was, but the direct neighborhood you're in, which is Attitash, directly to your west, Vail owned, Wildcat to your north, Vail owned, Cranmore to your south, sort of owned by a mini conglomerate out of Massachusetts. My thinking around Black Mountain before you did what you did and showed up was that it was a place that skiing had passed by. And though it had joined the Indy Pass, they hadn't made the capital upgrades. They weren't going to be able to compete in this new world. What you've proven, by at least from my observations showing up, is that if you reboot the atmosphere and give people that sort of experience that you remember, that is so core to your ski identity, that they will show up. And if you give them a viable product and the lift goes to the summit, which was, yes, always one of Black's biggest problems. But what does that response to that cultural reset tell you, even outside of the context of Black Mountain, about the hunger within the ski community for an alternative to what the mega pass reality has brought to our mountain experience and the way that it's changed it? What does Black tell you in the success there? I mean, tripling, that's incredible. About the potential here for skiing to maybe be something different.
Yeah, I think, look, when I started into Benny in 2015, and then obviously we saw the promise in Indy Pass, right? People were hungry for something different. We're now seeing that in Black. People are very hungry for something different. I firmly believe that skiing is in a bit of an identity crisis. And I think people need a place to turn, and people want something that's hopeful and that's not extractive, and something that is community and all of these things that, people want to be a part of. And you can't, that's what people love about skiing, is that aspect of community, that belonging, it's as much of a Boy Scout, Girl Scout group or the YMCA or like, it has a real community aspect to it. And people are hungry for that. And I think not only are some people hungry because they're nostalgic about that's what skiing used to be and it's changed and it's gone through these iterations, it's been corporatized, it's gone all these different things. But I think also it's just people that never knew that about skiing are also really surprised and invigorated when they feel it. Black Mountain continues to validate all of my childhood feelings about what skiing was and what I hated when I lost it and how hard it was to find it again. And then how you couldn't find it. So we sort of had to build it. Like you can go into a hotel and you can have the best bedding and you can have the best breakfast, right? And all those things are pretty standard. All those things are pretty expected. But then if somebody comes around and gives you a free cookie, it's amazing how you just don't care about the bedding or the breakfast or the valet parking or anything else. You got a free cookie. And so a delightful surprise, if you can surprise your customers with something, they're going to remember you more. And they're going to think about that. We want people to remember their time at Black. And I think that's what people are feeling when they come here instead of going to someplace else in the valley or someplace else in the state, is that we're giving them things to remember here. And we're building an emotional connection and a reason for them to come back, not just an extractive marketing ploy.
All right. So the cookie thing, the delight thing, I want to linger on that for a moment because I have a special guest. Logan, come over here. He has some questions for you, Eric. I know you guys are buddies.
Yeah, bud. What's up? What do you got?
Hey, Eric. It's been
This
a
is
minute.
Logan for
For
the viewers and listeners.
been-
Okay, because I know who Logan is. But yeah, go ahead, Logan. What do you got?
Well, I was wondering, when did Cookie O'Clock become a thing?
When did the cookie thing become a thing? At Black Mountain, it became a thing when we had a really long lift line and people were sort of, a little disenchanted. We lost the triple chairlift, the black one, and we had to turn on the double, the red one. And there was just a really long line. It went all the way to the platter lift. And so we went out there and gave everybody cookies. And it sort of kind of put that aha moment in me. And I had worked at Beaver Creek. And so I've had the cookies there. And I've worked in Europe where there's a lot of cookies, but that's where the cookie thing came from.
I was also wondering, I've heard you're gonna sell something. What is it again?
I think he wants to know what your plan is with Black Mountain.
You and everyone else in the world. We are going to turn Black Mountain into a member-owned, community-owned, co-op-owned. There's a lot of different words for it. We're going to turn it into, instead of one person owning it, lots of people can own it together.
So Logan, what did you like about skiing at Black Mountain?
So I really liked just how it was so nice, and there are a bunch of runs and different lifts, and I just really like how it gets really original and you can get really used to it very fast.
Do you have any more questions for Eric?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
So what's your favorite part about owning the mountain? I know I already know this, but tell everybody.
Well, let's see. I love heavy equipment. I love the ability to go out and drive a snowcat or make snow or the snowmobile like you and I got to ride on. I love all those things.
Let's do one last question.
Okay. So, are you planning to make any more runs? Like any more trails?
We are. Yeah, I think we're going to make some more right from the summit. We're going to certainly clean up. There's some old ones that have been really grown in, so we're going to clean them up.
All right.
Okay.
We'll have to go back next year. All right. Thanks,
Yes.
Logan. Appreciate the guest host.
Okay, bye
All right.
guys. Have an
Thanks,
amazing
dude. See you
time.
soon.
Let's linger on the co-op here, Eric. So there's only, as I mentioned in the intro, only one ski area in the United States has succeeded in becoming a co-op, and that's Mad River Glen. Now, Mad River Glen is a very special place for a lot of reasons. But above all, it's 2,000 vertical feet, and the runs are steep, and it has that single chair, and it gets 250 inches of snow per year, right? Black Mountain's half that height. It gets about half that snowfall. Your chair is awesome. But how is Black Mountain going to be able to successfully convert? Because we've had ski areas like Magic, Saddleback, good ski areas, try to do this and fail. How are you going to make this work?
Well, one, I think we've got the power of the Indy Pass behind it.
Mhm.
We have the Indy Pass microphone. Two, I think skiing is definitely, like I said, more in an identity crisis currently, and there's really good opportunity for a different and better result. But three, I'm gonna play with that ownership structure, right? Like it, I don't believe necessarily that we need 1,000 people on the board, right? I think that we can have different levels of ownership. I think that there's different levels of leadership. I think we're going to try to pull the best from a lot of different worlds and bring it all together. And all those people have the singular goal of keeping this place open. So I'm not trying to put it necessarily in a square co-op box or a square nonprofit box. We've seen both of those work and not work in skiing, but I think we're gonna take a bunch of ingredients, put them in, learn a little bit, and get the recipe right. And I think that's why it's gonna work, because we're gonna take a little bit of a different approach to it.
Do you have a timeline of when you want to announce details on how folks can actually buy in?
Depends on the Security and Exchange Commission.
Okay.
Uh, so we're getting really close. We want to do it right. We want to do it once. We want to do it really well. We want to make sure that there's enough runway for additional investment and capital to make it happen. I really, again, I look at this as not something that has to be done in a single season. We would certainly like it to be. We'd like to get in a really good place for next year. But most importantly is that we take our time, we bring in the right people to advise us, and we do this correctly. Because I think skiing's going to get one shot at this for a little while. I think it's really easy to sit back and go, wow, when this works, everything's going to be great. But what if it doesn't work, right? What if it doesn't work? What if Indy Pass can't pull this off? What if the community can't pull this off? And to me, that's really, really damaging for what we stand for. So there's a lot to win here, but there's also a lot to lose. And we're going to take our time and we're going to do it right.
To go back to the Mad River Glen example for a moment, like I said, they keep the single chair. They don't make snow below 2,300 feet. That's not going to work at Black Mountain, right? I think if anything, it needs a big snowmaking investment, and you've started a lot of that, and you can talk about that. But there's certain character pieces of Black that I think are important. The narrowness of the trails, the sort of confusion of the trail network, I think is brilliant. The double chair, I love the double chair. Some would argue that maybe that is an important part of the mountain's identity and needs to stay in place. For people who are used to Black Mountain and love Black Mountain as it is when it's a functional, fully operating ski area, which elements do you think that the co-op needs to retain to keep this character in place?
Well, again, I don't want to speak for the co-op necessarily, right, or the future group. I mean, I can tell you that I would never rip out the double chair. I think it's fantastic, and the lattice towers and in the mid station and the way that it goes over the Alpine cabin, I think are really, really cool. Did we need to cut some new trails? Yeah, we blew out some rock at the last minute because essentially we didn't have enough trail capacity off the summit to get down. And so there has to be some changes, right? Obviously, if we weren't going to change anything, then how in the world could we expect a different and better result if we just did the exact same thing every year? So you have to have improvements, but never make improvements for the sake of taking away your biggest advantage, right? And the biggest advantage is the classic New England skiing. It is the south facing. It is the history. It is the way the place feels, right? The way the place skis. And so I would advocate for never getting rid of those advantages.
So the co-op, should you be able to successfully hand it off to them, that would be a big deal because Mad River Glen, I believe their co-op formed in 1995, and no one else has been able to do it since then. But no one else has approached it the same way as you. If you're able to pull this off, do you look at this as a blueprint to say, okay, we did this at Black Mountain, we can do this at other ski areas that may be facing the same sorts of challenges?
Yeah, I mean, the problems are not unique to Black, right? The problems exist everywhere. And I think this is something that if we can get it right and we can iterate and we can learn, that can scale across skiing. We're seeing this same issue everywhere. And, in some ways, I see really successful things happening already. Like you look at the group that bought White Pass and the community members that sort of banded together, a handful of them to keep that where it's at, right? Like that's a piece of the model. Look at Antelope Butte, right? Like that nonprofit piece and that community fixture, that's a piece of the model. What Mad River Glen did is a piece of the model. What Saddleback did, right, with impact investing, that's a piece of the model. There's all these things that are a piece of the model, and it's not. It doesn't have to just be one box, nonprofit, co-op, those type of things. What we need to do is we need to find a scalable solution for skiing that complements what the corporations have scaled across skiing over the last couple decades.
So you've gotten pretty active in several different ski areas over the past few years. Antelope Butte, where you joined the board, Hickory in New York, where Indy Pass helped them to fund liability insurance, and now Black Mountain. Zooming out here, what are you trying to do? Are you looking at different models and seeing what works? What's your goal here with getting directly involved with all these different ski areas?
I think it's the same goal that motivated starting Into Benny. It's the same goal that motivated Indy Pass. It's the same goal that's motivated those three things that you've talked about, and it's the same goal that's motivating stuff that's already in works for future projects. Right? Is that when I sit down, right, as a human, and I like write down my 10 happiest moments, like 8 of them have to do with skiing with my family. And those aren't high speed lifts or gondolas or, fancy bottles of wine. They're, where we grew up. They're turning the lights on and off. They're learning to drive a groomer, going for a ride in a groomer for the first time. And so those things have had a really big impact on my life. And I'd be a very different person if it wasn't for skiing. And I feel that those opportunities are getting smaller and smaller the more corporatized skiing gets and the more inaccessible that it becomes. So that's really the problem I'm trying to solve. I think, again, there's lots of ways to make money and spend your time on the planet, but this is how I want to spend mine. So that's what I'm doing.
So what are you learning as you go through these very different processes with these very different ski areas in very different regions? You've made this comment to me before that you believe perhaps a quarter of America's ski areas need a different operating model, not necessarily a for-profit business model. So how is your thinking evolving as you engage with these ski areas and see how they operate, see what works, see what doesn't? Where are you at right now with the path forward? And I know you don't like the term save, but the path forward for independent ski areas to be sustainable long term. And do you still think that number is 25%?
Yeah, I think it might even be bigger than that. It's a really tough business. The math doesn't work very well on a micro scale. Okay. And I think one of the biggest issues that I see is on the vendor side, where obviously insurance is becoming remarkably restrictive and expensive. Like I couldn't even believe. Everyone knows insurance is a problem in skiing. I couldn't believe when we got our bill this year at Black Mountain. I just, how is that even possible?
Can you tell us how much it is?
A lot. It's a lot. It's like 10% plus of revenue. And so that just doesn't work, right? Obviously, I started Into Benny because I felt the same thing about technology and options for small resorts to compete, on data and scalability and resources there. Indy Pass, provides an option to, I look Indy Pass as a bit of a vendor to these ski areas, right? Where we help get customers to places and support with things that ski areas couldn't do on their own. Like snowcats, they're really expensive. And if we want to go out and buy a brand new snowcat, we're going to buy the same brand new snowcat that Vail's going to buy. And we're likely going to pay significantly more money for it here at Black. But my point is, even just look at the cost of the snowcat. We're both driving around a European $500,000 machine, right? Black doesn't need a European $500,000 machine. Black needs a Subaru. but there are no Subaru snowcat groomers. There's only Mercedes and BMW, right? So I think that's a problem. The same thing happens with lifts, right? We've got a duopoly, in my opinion, in lift manufacturers. Again, mostly European based and those type of things. And what Black Mountain really needs is to be able to go put in a nice, simple fixed grip lift that doesn't cost a couple $1 million, or a company to retrofit and modernize some older equipment to make it work. So I think there's a huge breakdown in the vendor side of things to support small skiing. And I think that's a deeper change that a lot of people aren't talking about, because these small ski areas need support infrastructure and vendors and suppliers and purchasing power to essentially compete on that corporate level. So I think that's an issue, and it's very concerning. Obviously, the weather is concerning, but the biggest thing that concerns me is that in skiing, we really struggle to compete for people's time. And in skiing, we always think we're competing with other ski areas, right? Well, you go here and I'm going to have this program and pull you here and go there. But, we like the idea of attracting new people into skiing, but we're just not very good at it in general. And yes, there's some graphics and things go up and down, and more people ski a couple of years ago than ever before and those type of things. But I don't look at it as more people skiing. I look at it as like people spending time at a ski area versus being glued to their phone, or people spending time at skiing versus tennis or golf or something else, right? Like, I never look at Indy Pass or Black Mountain as competing for people's money. I look at like we're competing for people's time. So we got to solve that problem. And skiing is very expensive. It's very time consuming. It takes a lot of input. It takes a lot of work. And we have to figure out how to make it simpler if we have a reasonable expectation to get more people to do it. Without getting more people to do it, the only other option is to charge the current people that we have more and more money. And that's how you end up with $300 lift tickets.
So there's a lot of issues there.
There's a lot of issues, yeah.
You have ideas for solutions, being sort of a big time thinker. I know, for example, you spend a lot of time in China, and that you have worked across the globe and have this understanding of the way that the global economy works. What is the solution to breaking up the chairlift duopoly, or making the snowcat that doesn't cost $450,000, right? The Chevrolet of snowcats, or Subaru, as you put it. We did have SkyTrack come up, but then the Lightner Palma bought them. You do have Partech, but they don't really make new lifts anymore. So it's a hard business for me to imagine just somebody just starting, in New York or wherever. So what are the answers? What is this something that you can do? Does it have to be a disruptor? Is it something that's going to come from overseas? What do you think solves this infrastructure cost problem?
By the way, I want to add snow guns into that too, right? Like, yeah. I've gotten to spend a lot of time making snow here at Black Mountain, and man, there's a lot of places and that Black Mountain that we just need a single stage gun, right? Like, we just need something simple. It isn't that complicated, and you can't really justify the ROI to do something more than that. But remember, right? Like, the biggest buyers in skiing are, the top 5 or 6 or 7 conglomerates, right? And they're really driving the direction of the product as well. And so I do think the key word that I would pick on is disruption. And I think disruption is important. And I think the industry needs to be continually disrupted. How do you build a chairlift company? I don't know yet. How do you do something different with grooming? And maybe it's not like building a new groomer. Maybe it's just getting Piston Bully to make a model that maybe makes a little bit more sense. And yeah, we can shoehorn in the used market and go down that road, and those things make sense. But I think you've got to be a disruptor. And that was the point with Entebeni. And, we built up software and hardware companies solely focused on skiing in Granby, Colorado. And it's definitely the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. And I think if you can pull stuff off like that, then I think building a chairlift isn't that bad at some point. And, again, the biggest problems are solved by the best people. And you've got to put the best people in the room and figure those things out.
A lot of you come to this podcast to hear from the best minds in skiing. But what if you want to find one of these great leaders for your own mountain team? Well, I want to introduce you to my friends at Profile Search International. They are the ski industry talent acquisition experts and are the only executive search and recruitment firm in the world that is 100% focused on the ski industry. Profile Search has used their intimate understanding of skiing and related industries and of available candidates worldwide to place hundreds of transformational leaders at the best and most progressive ski areas for over 30 years. With offices in the US and Canada, Profile Search can find and negotiate with the right leaders for your team. You can reach out to them directly at profilesearch.com or contact them by phone or email, or send me a note and I will connect you directly with this expert team. All right, back to Erik. Yeah, I'm totally with you on all of that. And I'm a big advocate for a simpler ski experience when it comes to not needing the fast lifts and all the fancy stuff all the time. One thing that I think that all ski areas do need to modernize is technology, because that is just where our world is moving. And if you don't meet consumers where they are, you might as well not exist. So that is really how you made your big entrance into skiing. And I realize you worked in skiing before, but talk about Enta Benny, Erik, and why you founded this company.
Yeah. So I assume you've flown Delta Airlines recently, right?
Mm-hmm.
You probably booked your ticket online, right? Used Google, used an app. When was the last time you called Delta Airlines and booked a ticket organically over the phone only?
Yeah, 1999.
1999. When was the last time you went to the airport counter and paid cash for an airline ticket?
Never,
right? And so a huge portion of like ski school products in skiing right now, regardless of what system you use, it's very hard to book them online, right? Give us a phone call. Consumers are absolutely used to, and rightfully so, being able to, be easy to do business with. And skiing transactions are complicated, right? You're not just ordering a shirt online. There are complications, there are waivers, there are a lot of dependencies, there's a lot of things happening that make it a more complicated ski experience. But the consumer doesn't care. And again, coming back to competing for people's time, not people's money, we are competing for people's time. And that starts with the minute you ask them to buy something. The minute you ask them to buy something, you're competing for their time. And it's got to be efficient and it's got to work. So that was really the main reason, as I felt skiing was exceptionally painful when it came to being able to purchase things and transact and do things as a ski instructor. So my original sort of piece, prior version, was building some ski school scheduling things and those things to try to solve that problem. And then I had looked at integrating into all of these different solutions. And I was like, wow, that really cannot be the best thing that's out there. This looks like it was built in 1999, the last time you bought a ticket on Delta Airlines on the phone. And so I kind of went through the whole motion and said, I think it's got to start over. We got to start over. And if we're going to start over, then I'd really like to start over and purpose build something for the smaller operators. Doesn't mean that it can't be used at scale, but if I want to make a difference, the people that I want to make a difference for are not the megacorps. They're the independent operators. They're the smaller groups. They're the community-owned places, co-op, nonprofit, private, whatever it is. That's where I want to spend, my time. And a lot of that kind of came back to my journey as a skier, where I started at Ski Tamarack and we had all these amazing things and it was going to close. And then we went to the next bigger place. And then I went to Vermont and taught skiing. And then I went to Chamonix, and then I went to Beaver Creek. And, I kept getting bigger, but it never got better, right? It always just got bigger. And I still always wanted to go back to that 15-year-old ski season that I had. And so that's where I wanted to spend my time. Those are the people I wanted to help. Those are the people I wanted to learn from. And I don't know, I kind of think like everyone's got a family, right? We all got like members in our family that we like, and we all go to the family reunion. But small ski areas are like that cool aunt and uncle that you really always want to hang out with in the corner, right? So those are the people that I want to go hang out with. Those are the people I want to go to dinner with. Not the people that I'm forced to go to dinner with because they're my family or they're the biggest customer in the room.
So let me clarify that you're talking about Ski Tamarack, New York.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
small ski area that's now part of the existing Buffalo Ski Club. So let's go back there, Erik, because this is an important piece of your story, and then we'll bring it back to Entebeni. So you grew up skiing at Ski Tamarack. You loved it. It was your place. Tell us what it was like there, why you loved it so much, and then what happened.
Yeah, it was the place you could pull up and, drop all the stuff outside, and dad would park the car and plug in the crock pot and just go out ski. All the trails came back to one spot. It was kind of a place where you could learn to be independent. You had your group of friends. I got into the ski school when I was 14 and learned a lot. I remember, mom and dad in the bar, and I'd be out teaching lessons every hour. And it was the best part of our life, both as myself as an individual and our family time together. And there was nothing else that we did as a family. Like there was no boat trip or golf game or movie that we would go watch where you would ever spend that much time together and do those things. And so I just really loved it. And then when it went away pretty quickly and traumatically in that fall that I think I turned 16. And so you spend like 8 months in the off season looking forward to skiing and getting ready and going to the ski swaps and getting all your stuff. And then all of a sudden somebody tells you that that's not going to exist anymore. And then you look at the next option and you're like, wow, we're going to go from an area this big to an area this big. Yeah, it was, I didn't like it at all when it closed.
But you kept going to bigger ski areas.
Yeah.
Were you chasing something? Were you chasing a feeling?
Yeah. I mean, I went through like my level 1 and 2 and 3 PSIA, chasing that big mountain skiing and being a ski instructor and traveling the world. And I think all those things are great. I think there's amazing pieces of skiing that happen at all these iconic resorts, but it never checked the box for me as a human, the way I was always told or marketed to that it should, and powder days and those things. What always checked the box for me as a human were those days at Ski Tamarack. And it's taken me, 2 decades to figure out why. But Black Mountain has been part of that realization.
Somewhere in there, you mentioned you were doing some software or some lesson scheduling software. How did you learn how to do that, and how did that opportunity come up? Is this something you went to school for and learned? Like, how did you know how to do that?
No, I'm self-taught and everything that I've done. I have a high school education. I took C++ in high school. I'd love to tinker with things for sure. It definitely took a long time to figure out, but I wanted to combine sort of the love for software and the love for, building things and CAD design and doing things like that, and wanted to kind of move it into one company. And so basically what I did is I said, okay, what are the 3 things that I really like? Well, I like solving problems with technology and processes. I like building things, and I like skiing. And so that's where I said, hey, instead of constantly trying to adhere to someone else's rule book or job description, I'm just going to write my own.
So you decided you want to start a company. I mean, that's great, but how did you make it happen?
We just took our time. To this date, the website's the same as it was when we launched the company. Stayed super focused on not marketing or doing anything in that manner. Still, I don't think I've ever gone to a trade show or a ski show. 100% laser focus on the product, right? And I think like the most difficult thing to do is to figure out, sort of that balance of sacrifice, right, to getting things done. And so, every time you get up on a detail, right, like you're sacrificing your time. Like you'll get super deep into a feature, but details are really important, but they can stop the important things from happening. So you have to choose, especially when you build a company and a company is very fragile and it's earlier, you have to choose what you want to be perfect at and what you want just to be good enough. And so that's that balance. And what we decided was I need to be 100% perfect about the mission and the problem we're trying to solve. We have to spend 90% of our time and energy understanding the problem we're trying to solve and 10% actually building the solutions. So, one of the first thing I went out and bought was an RV. I bought a big giant used RV and a laptop and decided to drive around the country and meet ski areas and show up in their parking lot and really understand the problem people are trying to solve.
How does Entebeni work? Because you want to be accessible to small ski areas, right? But a lot of them that I talk to are spooked by technology because of the cost. So how do you put it in for free? Like how do you do your whole process?
Well, I think one of the early pieces for sure is just aligning on those install costs and aligning on that initial commitment, right? Like we could have the best software and hardware in the world, and we could go to a small ski area parking lot and say, "Hey, that'll be $250,000 up front," and they're like, "Okay, that's great. Have a nice day." And so, if the problem we're trying to solve is help these places out, it doesn't matter how good the software is. If they can't use it or can't get it, then it just doesn't matter. The result's the same. So I think we looked at the whole piece, right? We sat down and we said, okay, what's the problem we're trying to solve? Like these places need data. They need to be able to act on the data. They just need to be able to be more informed and make better decisions. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of looked at that whole spectrum and said, okay, there are 4 key steps here, right? The first step is you have to value the data. So we go into a ski area and they're like, we don't care. It doesn't matter. Then I just say, great, just take the $100, stamp the ticket, be done. Like you don't need to. Like if you don't value it, it doesn't matter. If you do value it, then you proceed to step number 2, right? Step number 2 is you have to collect the data. If you can't collect the data, it doesn't matter. So that happens sometimes through multiple systems, one at F&B, one at ski school, one somewhere else, one online, one in person, right? You've got to collect the data. So you have to have a system that collects it. And that like pure collection is important. Once you collect the data, now you go to step 3, which is you have to aggregate that data and analyze it, right? So that's where it gets particularly complicated. A lot of the mid-size multi-resort operators have done a good job of collecting it in the last 10 years, and now they struggle with analyzing it. Small ski areas, sometimes they're not even valuing it, or they're not collecting it, so it's impossible to analyze, right? And aggregate. So step 3, analyze and aggregate the data. Step 4 is you have to take action on the data, right? Which means step 1, 2, and 3 have to happen quick enough for it to matter, right? But also step 1, 2, and 3 have to be accurate enough and purposeful enough to make decisions off of. If you don't do step 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 2, or 4, or 3, or 1 individually, the result's the same. It doesn't matter, right? You can collect the data all you want. If you don't make a decision on it, who cares? You might as well shouldn't have done it in the first place. So Entebeni, we have to support all phases of those things. And when we start off, a lot of times I start off in the parking lot advocating for data, advocating that it's important and why it's important. Then we go through a couple-year process, get the system in. It takes a few years to really start collecting. And it takes a few years to then aggregate potentially. And that's where we really compress at Entebeni because we built the whole thing from the ground up. There is no outside integrations. But then ownership has to get comfortable acting on it, right? They have to trust it and look at it. And so there's a lot there. And I think supporting all of those steps and then a couple more that I haven't quite figured out yet are important.
What year did you found Entebeni?
It's like 2016, I think. Yeah.
Okay. So we're in 2025 recording this. You've had almost a decade. As you look back on the progress that you've made as a company, the progress that skiing has made as an industry, sort of the COVID shock into technology, what's your optimism level as far as Is skiing, independent skiing, adapting to a digital first world? Um, and can they fully get there where you think they need to be in order to be where the modern consumer is?
I maybe, maybe if you look at the growth of like, let's look at like tech hubs to some degree, like Boulder at some point, obviously Silicon Valley. There's a couple other really cool tech hubs in the world that are a little smaller, right? Like the way that those places continue to grow is because there's a really nice, easy, safe space for multiple technology companies to try things, right? Think tanks and startups and that whole startup culture, right? Skiing isn't a very safe place for those things. It's been super hard. It's a rough industry to form a company in and gain traction. And so, what if I were to answer your question? No, there's no hope. It would be because we don't have a necessarily innovative or startup culture, especially in North America, when it comes to ski technology. And it's very, very hard to win and very, very easy to lose. That's number one. And I think that's for a couple reasons, right? Because you can easily raise a lot of initial investment and energy in things around building something for golf because the size of golf is twice, 100 times the size of skiing. Skiing has been on an island. And I heard somebody say once that skiing has ignored technology. I actually think technology has ignored skiing because it's such a small little place and it's very hard to build things purpose built for it. And if you were going to spend all this time and energy, you should build something like Entebeni that does point of sale across all these different industries, and then it would be worth $1 bazillion more than it is. If that's the problem you were trying to solve, if you were trying to build a company to sell it, then that's great. I'd never sell Entebeni. Like I've said that many times on the record, and I don't know what it would ever take for me to do that. I've said no many times, and it's my favorite thing to say no to. But if you're trying to keep things around, then this is actually a really amazing place to build things in. Everybody's sort of afraid of being in, or that a lot of like people that I interact with in the tech world, they're like, I can't believe you're in such a small industry. And I'm like, well, yeah, but there's no competition.
Right.
Like if I had to go into the restaurant business, I'd have, 950 million competitors in the point of sale business. We legitimately have like 5 in skiing, and only 1.5 of them I would consider a competitor. So there's benefits if you're super focused on the problem you're trying to solve, which is skiing. However, that creates a ton of liabilities in the fact that technology has essentially ignored skiing. So that's why I would say no to your question. Why I would say yes is because I think it's become very, very obvious that where you can compete, you're never going to go out and buy 5 new lifts a year like Val or 10 new lifts a year like Val. But where you can level the playing field very quickly and very scrappy is on technology. And we do that at Black, obviously using a lot of advanced features that haven't been released to the Entebeni user group yet. But man, you can fight back really quick with technology. It's no different than looking what you've done with Storm Skiing, right? Your platform has allowed you to build a really interesting company that you use Substack, right? You use a distribution network that levels the playing field. You don't have to be CBS and have a massive camera shop and have a production office and do all of these things. So technology is a great equalizer in a lot of ways. So that's why I would say yes to your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't have been able to do any of this 20 years ago. I would have needed offices and a printing press and all kinds of things. So you had Entebeni and you founded this specifically to help small ski areas. When you bought Indy Pass, and we were acquainted before that, I didn't really get the connection. I think I do now. But take us into your head. Why did you buy Indy Pass, and how does it relate to the mission that you have with Entebeni?
So we built the original technology for IndyPass from day one.
Okay.
Right. So any transaction that's ever happened in IndyPass has been through Indy, been really uniquely involved with Doug since day one. And
But wait, I'm sorry to jump in, but you weren't his original tech partner.
we were. Yes.
Right, but that wasn't his intent. What? So
No, that was not his intent. Actually, it's an interesting story. He, Doug, I read about the Indy Pass in a ski area magazine alert, uh, which is really, those alerts are the only thing I really read in skiing. And so it comes in my inbox, I read the whole thing. And we had been talking about doing something like this. We had obviously looked that there needed to be a multi-pass product. And our original thought at Indy was that the original problem we're trying to solve is we're building a system very similar to Indy Pass, but so that people that owned multiple resorts could essentially share seasons passes, or something more like a regional pass or a ski Wisconsin type thing, right? So that's where originally were. And then I read about it, and I picked up the phone, I found Doug, and I called Doug and I said, hey, Doug, I think we're perfect for this XYZ. And he goes, boy, that all sounds really good. But I'm going to sign a contract with the company next week. So thanks so much. And I'll see how it goes, and have a great day. And so I thought about it, and I was visiting my parents, and I picked back up the phone and I said, well, I really think you're wrong on this. I think we should figure it out. Doug goes, no, thanks so much. I gotta go. And I said, okay, well, I will meet you for breakfast in Portland tomorrow. And he said, okay. And I said, yeah, I'll fly across the country. I'll meet you in breakfast in Portland. So we went to Mother's Cafe in downtown Portland, sat down for an hour that turned into 2.5. And I think at that point, like, we knew that this was going to be it, that we were going to make it work. So, and really what I told Doug is that this has to be a custom system. This is not something that you're going to shoehorn into a pre-existing point of sale system. The most important thing that IndyPass does is it distributes revenue equitably, right? That's really what reciprocals don't, the problem that reciprocals don't solve. And so distributing that revenue requires somehow collecting all these visits independently at a bunch of ski areas that may not even have an electronic point of sale system. So we have to build something that not only sells the pass and does it all that fine from an e-commerce standpoint, we have to build a collection system, right? And again, you come back to step one, valuing the data, step two, collecting the data, step three, analyzing the data, step four, doing something with the data. IndyPass, step 2 and 3 needed a really, really unique solution. So we went in, decided to do that, built it, and my dad bought the first pass that October, which was super cool. I picked up the phone, I said, hey, go ahead and try this thing and see if it works. And to this day, he's still sale number one. So that's how we ended up in IndyPass. And Doug and I really learned to work together. And sometimes we didn't work together very well. But he was remarkably patient with me, and I was remarkably patient with him. And we found a way to really overcome a lot of challenges. And that naturally progressed into IndyPass growing and Doug wanting to sell the business, and rightfully so. IndyPass is a remarkable amount of work. And Doug wanted to do that. And we were certainly there to support that. Why I ultimately ended up buying it is I didn't want someone else to buy it. And there were other suitors out there that I don't think would have been a good fit. And I think IndyPass would have become more of a media brand, to be honest, and much less of a pass with a purpose that it has today. And so it was a huge risk for us to do it. And I'm glad we did it, and I'm glad it worked. And I think it was an odd decision for a tech company, for sure. And
So
yeah,
you said earlier, Into Benny's not for sale. Will you say the same about IndyPass?
yeah, 100%. Yeah.
You called it a pass with a purpose. What's the purpose under your ownership?
I think our purpose and our mission are a result of our actions. I don't think you start with a purpose and go the other way. I think you start with actions and go that way, right? Like when you when you walked into Enron's lobby, right, you know, they had their core values and their purpose on the wall, and integrity and accountability and those type of things, right? Like, I don't see a purpose as something, I never try to describe our purpose, right? Or define our purpose. Our purpose is a result of our actions, and our actions speak for themselves, right? We're stepping into a place like Black Mountain. We support independence, you know, as much as anyone on the planet, right? We try to balance the needs of Indy Pass with the needs of our operators. We provide a safe harbor for people that want to ski multiple places but don't want to buy a mega pass. So I think our purpose is our actions, and our actions to date have been super focused on supporting these small ski areas, both from a marketing, a technology, a revenue standpoint. I think that's our purpose.
How important has that revenue become to your partner ski areas?
I mean, I think it's very important. You know, there's some ski areas that were, you know, 20% of day ticket sales, and there's some ski areas that were more than that. So I think it's really, really important. But it's, Stu, it's not the revenue, right? Like, it's not the revenue. It's the humans. It's the people that we put at ski areas that wouldn't go there otherwise. That's the most important thing, right? It's really, I want everyone's checks to get bigger, and they have, and they have every year. Most people's checks have gotten bigger. There's a little bit of distribution that happens based on weather and those things, but every year the payout gets bigger and bigger at Indy Pass. But it's not the payout. It's the brand recognition. It's a tool for these resorts to attract people that wouldn't come otherwise. It's a tool to compete for people's time and money. And if there wasn't an Indy Pass out there, then there would just be an Icon and an Epic and something else, right? And it would be harder to get that family from Boston or Seattle to commit to skiing unless they went out and they bought a season's pass or they bought an Epic Pass. And you look at the other mega passes price points versus the Indy Pass price point, right? $299 for renewals. Like, that's a big difference. That's huge. And the other thing, if we are going to talk about money, the thing that drives me nuts about skiing is we always look at what the pass cost is on an individual basis, right? Oh, the Epic Pass is $999. Okay. I always look at it as a family of four. Like, right. That's what we do our pricing here. We price Indy Pass for a family of four. Because, like, my parents, you know, Mike and Kathy Mogensen in Buffalo, New York, right, in 2004, they didn't care what the single season's pass price was. They cared what it cost for four people to go skiing. That's the money that came out of their bank account. And so you could put four people on Indy Pass. You can put a family of four on Indy Pass for how much? Basically a single adult on the Icon Pass. And that's a big difference. So if that option wasn't there, if that off-ramp wasn't there, a lot of people would just keep driving down the highway and never take the off-ramp to skiing. And so I think it's really important. So it's not a money thing. It really is. It's a tool to compete, and it's not just to compete against the mega passes. It's to compete against how people spend their time.
So I think it's a great product. I tell everyone about it. Sometimes you can't buy it, and I know that's true of all passes. They have a certain date, but they don't limit Epic, they don't limit Icon, they don't limit Mountain Collective, the number of passes sold. Once you purchased Indy Pass, you put a cap on it. Why did you do that?
So I'm going to bring your question back to another question, right? You asked what the board or the future ownership of Black Mountain would have to do to keep it successful. And I said, never forget the problem you're trying to solve, right? In a few more words, right? And that's the same thing with Indy Pass, is never forget the problem we're trying to solve. We want to sell a different and better experience, right? Which is a less crowded experience most of the time. It's a more authentic experience, a lot of people say, right? It's something different. Never cut off your greatest asset. And our greatest asset was that these places weren't overrun and that the business was run differently and perhaps with more purpose than some of the larger passes. And I was willing to double down on that. I mean, I guarantee you that we could sell 30% more Indy Passes than we do. But I also think I like, and it's at odds, right? It's a conflict. I like the exclusivity of it because it creates more value and it creates more loyalty. So if we kind of look at to like season passes for a football team, right? Like a lot of places you don't give up your season's pass because it's really expensive and you bought in and you did lots of things. But if you're at the Green Bay Packers, you don't give up season's passes because you're never going to get them again. Right. And you're very loyal and you're part of that community and you're actually part of, ownership and those type of things. And I think a lot of people feel that ownership at Indy, and that's important because coming back to the budgeting thing, like I don't think you should look at selling passes just on a yearly basis. I think you need to look at it on a 5-year basis. And what I wanted to do with Indy Pass was build a loyalty over multiple seasons instead of getting caught in the chug every single season of constantly trying to reacquire or re-trick customers into buying a product. I want them to buy a product because they want to buy the product because that's what they want to do. And so there is a supply and demand factor. That's certainly number 2 in the importance of our decision, but number 1 100% is the product and what sets us apart.
So you're keeping the prices low, and you just announced 2025 to 26 prices, $299 for renewals, $349 for new pass holders, and you have to be on the wait list to get first crack at those, I believe. So talk about long term, what your thinking is around, and I know you just use the family of 4 example, around keeping this as a very affordable product, and how you intend to do that while still keeping this a sustainable business, or do you not look at Indy Pass as a business?
I don't look at it as a revenue center for Indy first and foremost, right? And so that allows us to make a little bit different decisions. It allows us to be more patient, and so being really patient with Indy Pass is important because it is fragile. And so I think being able to be patient allows us to put a cap on places that we wouldn't have to be if we were less patient. And I think the affordability is extremely important. It is very important, but we don't want to lead with price. We want to lead with purpose. But price is number 2.
So that's great for folks who get in and for skiers. Doug was very careful as he was building out his coalition not to put too many ski areas in one region on Indy Pass for fear that it would cannibalize season pass sales for his partner ski areas. You've continued to add density, and I think those concerns are still there among some independent operators. How do you balance that, Erik? How do you continue to keep this affordable and drive folks to your partners without hurting them and one of their main sources of revenue, which is those season pass sales?
Well, again, number 1, at the purpose, right? Our purpose is never to hurt any one of our ski areas, right? It would be a horrible thing for us to have a negative impact on their season pass sales in any meaningful capacity. Can I sit here and tell you that we don't cannibalize any seasons pass sales? No. Do I think it's in the single digits? Absolutely. And one thing that we look at, especially the resorts that are on Indy, we look at the lifetime journey of that customer. So we see when that customer first bought an Indy Pass, and then they went to Magic, and then they converted to a Magic pass holder, and they spent 2 years there, and then then they leave Magic because they spent their 2 years there, and then they come back to Indy. Well, just because they left Magic in year 3 doesn't mean that they cannibalized a pass sale, right? Yeah. That actually means that there was significant input, and then obviously, talk about the visits that they get paid for since then. So you have to look at the full picture when you look at cannibalization, and you have to look at it beyond a single year. Do pass sales go up and down? Sure, absolutely. Does Indy Pass continue to grow? Absolutely. So those are things that we have to explain. But at the end of the day, I don't see that's the biggest problem with Indy. Like if Indy were to fail, it would be because we got too aggressive. Let's say we added a 3rd day, right? we want to sell more passes. We're going to add a third day. That's probably the number one thing that we get asked from the consumer is add a third day onto Indy. We're never going to add a third day because at a third day, it will truly cannibalize those products, right? It's going to take the utilization much higher than it needs to be, and it will cannibalize seasons pass products. So we keep it at 2 for sure. We make really conscious decisions to make sure that we don't cannibalize past products as well. And not a lot of people talk about this, but we're only on sale for 18 days a year. And so I would argue that that's a very strong force against cannibalizing other people's pass sale. And the fact that we limit the pass sale until we have the data means that we're a data first company, and then we grow slowly instead of growing big and then finding out that we're cannibalizing. So we're taking small steps.
All right. Well, I love the direction you're taking it, Erik. It's an interesting story. And what I like best about it is that I think it's just beginning. I could do this all night, but people are already going to get sick of us, and we have part 2 coming up. So I'm gonna walk off on that, and I'm gonna work on getting you on here again to keep talking Indy Pass, Sent to Benny, and independent skiing. So thanks so much, Erik. Appreciate everything you're doing.
Thanks for what you do, Stu.
And that's Erik Mogensen, founder of Benny Systems, director of the Indy Pass, and temporary owner of Black Mountain, New Hampshire. Thanks so much for making that happen, Erik. If you like that combo, stand by for part 2 of the conversation between Erik and I, dropping for episode 200, where we flip the script and Erik interviews me. Thank you all so much for listening. I have tons of pods already in the can and dozens more coming your way in 2025. Please follow The Storm on X, YouTube, and Instagram at Storm Ski Journal, and subscribe to the Storm Skiing newsletter at stormskiing.com. Until next time, stay well, stay safe. I'm Stuart Winchester, and I'll talk to you again very soon.
The Storm Skiing Podcast is a Quicksilver Films production.